After sort of my speech therapy sort of came to an end, my speech therapist said, "Why don't you join the Nottingham self-help group for people who stammer?" And I said, I didn't even know it existed. Hi, everybody. As Hanan started his talk by saying where he was and what time it is for him. It's 10:20 a.m. in the UK. I'm in Nottingham, looking out the window today, and it's very rainy. We've got a weekend of rain, so I hope it's a bit brighter for everybody else out there. I'm here to talk a little bit about myself and my involvement with the self-help group in Nottingham. So just sort of briefly about myself and my sort of past with my stammer. Like a lot of people with a stammer, I stammered from the age of 3 to 4. Stammered all the way through my life, have had various stages of speech therapy. It always seemed as though I always went back to speech therapy when I had sort of big stages in my life, as in from infant school to junior school, then junior school to senior school, then went back when I was at college, then went back when I went to university. And very much I sort of felt school was a sort of a testing time, but when you go in at year 1, it's a very testing time, and then when you are leaving at year 5, you've sort of become quite comfortable with your speech and comfortable with everyone around you, and then it's that jump to the next school when you then become year 1 again, and it's that sort of transition that I think gives, well, it's certainly given myself a lot of things on my mind, and my speech was sort of not as I'd wanted it to be, or not as it had been in the past. So as I said, they were the times I went back to speech therapy. When I was about 35, I was in quite, well, I was in not a very good relationship, quite a controlling relationship, and this affected my speech quite a lot. And after sort of moving out of that relationship, I realised that my speech had become probably the worst that it had in many years. So I got in touch with our sort of, well, what we call the NHS, got in touch with the NHS, managed to find the number for the speech therapy department, and I made the call, which wasn't an easy call, but I made the call. And surprisingly enough, the lady that answered the phone was my speech therapist when I was about age 10. So she'd stayed in that job for sort of 20 plus years. 10 years on from that, she's now retired, but I owe her a lot of gratitude. But yeah, I went back speech therapy with her. It was probably the first time that I'd actually sat down with someone and spoke about how it made me feel and how other people interacted with me and my speech, whereas speech therapy before that was always about technique and practicing things. And as we all know, we can all practice these techniques in your 40-minute allocated time, but then when you leave that room or that practice under that controlled situation, sort of, I don't know, it's there in the back of your mind, but you sort of leave that controlled environment and your speech sort of reverts to form, really. So it was quite enlightening, really, that I sort of didn't go back to speech therapy to practice those techniques that I'd practiced before, but just basically talk about it, get it out in the open, speak about it as much as I could. And I found that by going back to speech therapy then allowed me to talk about it more outside of the speech therapy, which, as I'm sure we all have experienced, the more you talk about it, the more you become more comfortable about it. After sort of my speech therapy sort of came to an end, my speech therapist said, "Why don't you join the Nottingham self-help group for people who stammer. And I said, I didn't even know it existed. But I must admit, I'd still not come to terms with having my own issues with my speech, and the thought of going into a self-help group, and I envisaged this massive room with about 200 people in it, all with a stammer, and that to me was just not what I wanted. Anyway, after a few weeks of persuasion from my speech therapist, I turned up, and my thoughts about this big room and 200 people was soon changed. It was a very small room with about 5 or 6 people, a very manageable group, just everyone very welcoming, everyone just seemed happy there. They just seemed as though it was a place where they could go and they could speak without any judgment. They could speak, with with like-minded people, really, people that share the same frustrations, really. So the group that I was at originally started in 1986 and was set up by a gentleman called David Priest. Now, David had speech therapy with the same speech therapist that I had, and when he was ready to leave, she said to him, why don't you actually set up a group? So not just turn up to a group, but why don't you set up a group which can sort of facilitate the people that have had speech therapy and sort of really need that sort of time to speak with other people. So like I say, that was set up back in 1986. I think my problem with my speech was that I always wanted to appear fluent. I always wanted to, if I ever got introduced to anybody or if I ever met anyone new, my aim was to not let them know that I had a stammer, not because they wouldn't accept it, but it was me that wasn't accepting it. And my idea was that, the challenge to me was to make me appear as a fluent speaker. And as we all know, trying to be fluent, you put more pressure on yourself, and it just makes things worse. So the problem with trying to appear that you don't have a stammer is that you speak less and less. You don't stammer less, you just speak less. You avoid situations, you avoid conversations, you don't go out, you don't meet new people, you don't interact in groups. So, joining the self-help group was ideal. It sort of just made me realize that, it was time to sort of move on with that attitude of trying to appear as a fluent speaker. Like I say, I attended the group for, the group always meets on a Tuesday night, 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock. So they meet for 2 hours, and it's every 2 weeks. So after a while, David Priest, the chairman, decided to sort of step aside, and he asked me if I wanted to sort of take his sort of mantle, so to speak, and become a new chair. So that was another step forward in sort of me moving ahead with my speech, basically. While I was at this speech group, I continued to have dialogue over email and telephone calls with my speech therapist, and it was very much a time of I asked her to challenge me in certain things. I felt that by challenging myself with my speech would be a step forward. I very much relate working with my speech as I do with sport. I've been quite heavily involved with sport over the years, and I started to adopt the same attitude that I had with sport, that if I practiced my speech, then my speech would get better. If I had a positive attitude about my speech would get better. And it was basically having that attitude that, what you put into your speech is what you'll get back out of your speech. So I very much adapted a positive attitude towards it, realized that sometimes it wouldn't go as I intended, but then equally, sometimes it would go better than I intended, and I had to think about those positive steps forward to move myself forward. The challenges that my speech therapist sort of set for me, I went on the radio, did a presentation on the radio, did a presentation at a place called City Lit in London. I don't know if anybody knows of that. I also did a brief stint on answering telephone calls for the British Stammering Association. So basically all things that would sort of take me out of my comfort zone. Originally, when people would ask me if I would do a talk or speak about my speech, my first thing I would say is no. But I changed my attitude, and now when anyone asks me to do something like this morning, my first answer is yes. I always answer with a yes, and I always then work my way around how I'm going to do it and the best way I'm going to do it. And I don't know about a lot of people on here, but I've been on a lot of Zoom conversations in the last year, but I've never been on a Zoom conversation where you've got 3 pages, where you can see 3 pages of faces. So it's quite nice to see so many people. But I must admit, when I saw 1 out of 3 pages, I thought, blimey, there's going to be quite a few people there. So I must admit, my nerves today are more than usual. So getting back to the self-help group, obviously, in the past year or so, we've gone online. We've used Microsoft Teams. Our normal group, when we used to meet in person, used to average about 4 to 5 people. Going online with Teams, still meet at the same time on a Tuesday every 2 weeks. Going online on Teams is sort of boosted numbers, really. We probably get an average of 8 or 9. So sort of going online has certainly made it more accessible. An attendee of the group, who is Gareth, who is here at the moment, he will be talking at 1:40 England time. So Gareth actually lives in Belgium, so he wouldn't be able to attend the group, obviously, because he lives in Belgium. So with us going online now, it very much allows him to sort of access the group. So it also, allows other people that have sort of childcare issues to sort of join the group as well. So, going online has been sort of a good move forward for us. So just to sort of go over the sort of things that we would do in person at the self-help group, and also that we do online. When we all meet, we normally sit in a circle, or when we're online, we obviously sit in our little boxes. Basically, the first sort of 20 to 30 minutes, we introduce ourselves to the group. Even if there's no one new in the group, we'll still say our name, which we know is a bit of a challenge for some of us, but we'll say our name, we'll introduce ourselves, and we'll sort of slowly move around the group. Then we'll sort of go into how our speech has been in the last 2 weeks. Very much talk about the sort of positive outcomes about how our speech has been, and then we'll sort of talk about what challenges we've got coming up in the next 2 weeks. If anyone's got like a presentation at work, or we once had a guy do his best man speech at the group. So it's that sort of time for people to practice, or to use that sort of time to sort of speak to other people and get some positive feedback. So going on from after we've done our introductions, then we normally every week every fortnight we'll have a theme. So, and we normally ask a different person to chair that actual meeting. So it gives a different person every 2 weeks a different topic that they want to choose about what they want to do or what they want to talk about, and that sort of moves around in like a six session block. So at the end of every 6 sessions, we'll then plan the next 6 sessions, and we'll either repeat some of what we've already done that was successful, or someone may have like a new idea, and we'll practice and we'll implement that for one of the forthcoming sessions. So We, like I say, we normally meet for 2 hours. But we have changed that to being online for an hour and a half. I just felt that an hour and a half being online was probably a bit more manageable than sort of 2 hours when we meet in person. But I'm always amazed how quickly the hour and a half or the 2 hours goes. We sort of have a plan of what we're going to talk about or what we're going to do, but that time just flies by, and it's quite often that we get to the end of the session and we've not even done what we said we were going to do. But in my mind, that's a good meeting, because it means that we've had good interaction. People have had the chance to talk, and we've talked about something has perhaps been more important or more sort of more in people's minds. So things that we would do at the speech group, we do speaking circles. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with speaking circles, but that's basically just where one person will get up and they'll speak for a minute. They'll give good eye contact, and basically after the minute they've spoken, they'll get positive feedback from all the members of the group. Find that's a challenge for some people, but when you've given them the encouragement, that safe environment, they get up, they do their 60 seconds, and then they sit down and look quite relieved and quite surprised how easy it was for them. Well, not easy, but how not as bad as they thought it was going to be. So speaking circles is always good to get sort of people sort of up and talking. We'll also have debates where we'll have one side that will propose a certain way of thinking, and then another side who will be against that way of thinking. This is not always speech related. It can do with politics or current affairs and things like that. And then we'll have a person in the middle who will take on the opinions from both sides, and then we'll all come to some sort of agreement that we didn't agree or we did agree. So and then we'll have other nights where we do play reading. We get plays from the local library. We all have a different part. Play reading is usually quite a popular evening. We get more people turn up to the play reading. Once again, it takes a bit of encouragement, but once we're all sort of getting to the swing of things, the play reading is quite a good night. We also do quizzes, we also do games nights, and we also invite our local speech therapists along. Well, they all welcome all the time. They can come in whenever they want, but they very much see it as a self-help group, and they only tend to turn up when they are specifically invited. They can turn up whenever they want, but they see it as sort of our time to sort of lead what we do. But it's quite often the case that we will invite them in and they will practice, or they will talk to us about sort of new techniques or even old techniques or new ways of thinking or new research, basically. So, you know, it's good for us all to keep in touch with our speech therapists. Some people who come to the group have never been to a speech therapist, so sometimes it's a good link. They'll exchange phone numbers or email addresses and that sort of thing, and then certain people will then sort of go into speech therapy, which is ideal. I'm just looking at my notes, which so yeah, I mean, going on to Teams has been great for us, really. It's really opened up the numbers of people that sort of can sort of turn up to our meetings, really. I'm very much a believer of, to help our speech, we need to get good air into our lungs. And as I'm sure we'll all experience, that when we're on Teams, we start to slouch or we start to lean forward, or we don't sort of get that air into our lungs. And it's quite important when we are on Teams, and that we remind people that a good body position is ideal for getting the air into our lungs and helps with our speech. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else is part of a self-help group, but you know, it's certainly been beneficial to everyone that turns up to the group. I just believe there's a lot of people out there that don't know about self-help groups, or a lot of people that just aren't ready for the self-help groups. I get emails all the time saying, when's your next group, when's your next meeting? And they just never turn up. And then 2 years later, they will turn up. And it's just a case of sometimes they're just not ready to challenge their stammer. When I say challenge, I very much come from the school of, I was controlled by my speech for years, and now I've taken that control back. I'm not looking for fluency, but I'm looking for control is probably not the right word, but I'm looking to be able to manage it. So, so that's it really. Great to see you all. Like I say, never been on a Zoom call with so many faces, but I hope my presentation was informative, and I shall pass you on to the next speaker, who's going to be Stutter UAE. So thank you all, and see you all soon.